You can go and get a video of me, you can go get a lot of voice clips of me, and the system can learn from that. If you're asking it to create a version of my voice that speaks Mandarin, there is no data for that.
Only 12% think that translation as a subscription is definitely the future.
Automatic speech recognition, recognizing Swiss German dialect and then machine translating it into standard German text. And welcome to Slater Pod 77, the lucky episode today. Hello, Esther.
Hi, Florian. Why is it lucky?
7-7. It's the lucky episode.
7-7.
No,
great.
double 7. Not so. Yeah, it's the lucky episode. 7 is the lucky number. So double 7, double lucky,
Good.
you know.
Doubly
like in China,
lucky.
double 8,
Yeah.
triple 8, triple lucky. All right, today with Victor Ripperbelli, the co-founder and CEO of Synthesia.io, the tool that we've been talking quite a lot, and is one of the companies, technologies, one of the things that I've been most impressed by over the past, 1 or 2 years. Generate professional-looking AI videos from text in minutes in any language. There's so many use cases for this. But first, we're going to talk about translation as a subscription. Investor Legend uses RSI. RWS goes into subtitling, or at least adds capabilities to it. And then, very dear and close to my heart, Swiss German machine translation. I would not have expected anybody to care about Swiss German machine translation, but here we are. Yes. And then, let's talk about it later.
Language push.
Yes, very low resource. I wonder what kind of resources they have at all. And then the resource would change, like literally you cross a mountain and then the resource would change slightly. I mean, different dialects, right? Cool. So first, though, a little bit, not in a sense a news-driven topic, but something that we should discuss more generally as things move towards this is translation as a subscription. So we did run a poll on it, and the results were kind of surprising to me. So Esther, what was the poll? When did we take it? What were some of the results?
Yeah, I think it was pretty recent. About a month ago, end of May, we had 70 almost votes, and only 12% think that translation as a subscription is definitely the future. So you had 12% convinced that subscription for translation is the future. Around a third think it's potentially promising, and another third think it's suitable only in very limited use cases. Why does this surprise you, Florian?
I would have expected a bit more positivity to it. I mean, potentially promising, only for very limited. Yeah, I guess I would have expected the potentially promising to be higher, maybe like more than half, because it is something that I think generally is, if the industry at large can figure this out, it will make it just a lot easier to, for buyers to buy. I mean, when we speak to buyers, often that kind of some of these variabilities here are mentioned as a problem. So I thought this would have been more positively received. But why don't you walk us through some of the additional, some of the thinking we have on this? Also, we revisited the pricing report, so I think we plucked out some of the insights from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just all contributes to the discussion around maybe why some people think it's only useful for limited use cases, because I think there are a number of obviously considerations and challenges for setting up or moving to a subscription-based model. I mean, just briefly as background, what we're talking about then is having translation available via a cloud-based platform on a subscription basis. That might be based on a word count, based on a document count, or based on some other kind of volume metric. Broadly speaking, this is also now becoming, I guess, feasible in some way, shape, or form, or more prevalent in the industry because of improvements in machine translation. and general volumes, I think. The data that's now available out there around volumes, around ordering practices and things like that. Also sort of client need or desire for predictable pricing, and people carrying over their expectations from other industries like with tech or media or what have you, as well as LSPs having, or most companies having some appetite for the recurring revenues that subscription allows. So what we're seeing at the moment is that, I mean, there are an increasing number, I'd say, of LSPs who are offering subscriptions, but it tends not to be the primary model. So you have LSPs that are offering that as one of many service options. You would see, for example, a tiered pricing plan, maybe a basic, ranging up to a premium, depending on either the service level they're providing or the volumes, etc. And then when we're talking about the challenges, I mean, I think it is kind of linked to this predictability. And typically, I think in the language industry, we have rewarded predictable and high volumes. This would be one way of rewarding high and predictable volumes. But again, you would need to define what is a meaningful volume metric, or somehow cap it in terms of a timeline. I think also it's pretty hard to shift. If you're an LSP that's been based on a word model for decades now, I mean, knowing how to price that, if you maybe don't have that data or in a way that it's going to actually be beneficial both to you and your clients. So I can see why there's this maybe interim step of people exploring the uptake, rather than throwing everything away and trying to convert all clients to some kind of subscription-based models. I think one of my thoughts was that it might be easier for LSPs if they have in-house linguists, because to a certain extent, you kind of already know your costs. I can't remember why I thought that at the time. It might be linked to sort of SDL Slate. When SDL launched Slate a year or so ago, I remember thinking, okay, this makes sense because they have a team of, a big team of in-house linguists that they can make it quite seamless. So they can get away. They don't have to then do the outsourcing piece particularly, because it will go to the internal linguist. You can use some of the
maybe kind of idle capacity internally for this, right? If you have idle capacity.
It's just all internal. It would be kind of, like everybody being on one platform, which I guess you do have with freelance translators, but I don't know. It just sort of occurred to me that it might be, and I'm sure there's more to it, but it's kind of gone out of my thinking right now. But there are a lot of benefits as well. I think, as we said, it appeals because it's simple, it's predictable. And we did, as you say, discuss it in the pricing and procurement report. We had one commentator from We Localize talk to us as well about what they thought about the subscription model. And their take was actually that it promotes long-term cooperation and value generation.
Yes.
And the quote was, "It may still be centered around efficient pricing, but it allows for better retention of critical talent and incentivizes innovation in the localization workflow." So that's their takeaway.
I think one key component is that everyone, or one of the key problems is that everyone, or many expect, have a problem with the fluctuations in volume. Okay.
Yeah.
So they think, oh, I'm just project based, and I don't want to pay a subscription because what if I don't use my monthly allowance, right? And then the LSP is like, oh, what if the client exceeds the monthly allowance? Like we kind of have to cater to that particular client's needs all the time. But I think if you look at it maybe from an annual perspective, I think most buyers, if they do have regular needs, they'd probably underestimate, or they think they have more bulky volumes than they actually do. I think it's more predictable if you look at it on an annual basis. I remember when I worked back at the LSP, right? When you look at some of these volume flows of your clients over time, they actually tend to, there's some structure to it. There's some predictability to it, to many accounts. Of course, you always have these bulky projects that come in and they're super hard to predict, but those are maybe the ones that you can price, of course, on a project basis. But over the lifetime of a client, a 1 year time frame, I think it's more predictable maybe than many people think. And if you can, figure this out across an entire LSP, and you can leverage like one account against the other account, you're probably going to be able to make it work. Complicated, but I think it would be good. And actually, let me just close on that thought. If you manage to figure this out, you can move towards this subscription valuation as well. I mean, it's a bit of a stretch. You're not going to be a software subscription business ever as a service company, but as we all know, typically tech companies, the subscription companies tend to get valued on a multiple of revenue, and service companies tend to get valued on a multiple of their earnings when they go and raise capital or sell, right? So it's quite in the interest of LSPs to consider the subscription component much more than they probably have to so far. I think we can maybe leave it on that thought.
Wait, I remember why I was talking about the internal linguists, and it was because of
there you go. Shoot.
Minimum fees, because you might get hit with minimum fees if you're outsourcing, if it's small amounts coming in at a time. That was what my thinking was. Minimum fees, of course, complete other discussion. But yeah, there we go. There we go. Yeah,
you're right. Yeah. Because you wouldn't, I mean, a freelancer wouldn't want to do a $2 job, right? Or a $5 update. Hey, let's talk about something completely different. A billionaire, Bill Ackman, who also happens to be an investor in Kudo, has tweeted, guess what, about Kudo. And they turned it into a press release. Gotta say though, it's an interesting one. So, who is Bill Ackman? He's probably about $1 or $2 billion worth, depending on, however his portfolio is doing. He's, one of the most famous investors. He's kind of what they call an activist investor. So he shorted Herbalife, about 5 years ago. Herbalife is this, I don't know, what would you call it? It's almost okay. I wouldn't. They were accused.
You don't want to say pyramid scheme, right?
Yes, I
that's
think
what you're trying not to say.
They were accused of being like one of those pyramid schemes. So basically, you buy your stuff and then you need to offload it, these products to, I don't know, your neighbors, your friends, etc. And so that's why Bill Ackman shorted them. Shorting means you actually take a negative position on their stock performance. So you bet that the stock's going to go down. And there's an entire Netflix series on it called Betting on Zero. Around Bill Ackman shorting that stock and basically then pushing the narrative that Herbalife, was a company that was going to go to zero. Anyway, it didn't go to zero. Actually, stock went up, so that one didn't work out. But Kudo seems to be working out. So what they did is, and again, totally different investments. One is shorting a publicly traded company. The other one is, of course, growth funding a technology startup like Kudo, remote simultaneous interpreting. So just to clear that up. But now what they did was multilingual meetings. Yeah, we had Fardad on the podcast. So what Bill Ackman did is he used Kudo now to for an investor presentation. As they were announcing that they're buying 10% of Universal Music from Vivendi. I'm not sure how to pronounce that in English. And so they held an investor presentation, and they used Kudo to run it in 11 languages, French, Japanese, Mandarin, Cantonese, Korean, German, etc. They used Kudo, and he tweeted about it. And there's he has like 500,000 Twitter followers, and there was a kind of an interesting discussion, or like a lot of people like the fact that they're using this. So what's my point? My point is that this kind of is a great example of expanding the pie, like how technology expands the language services pie. Because until this technology was available, only very recently, like no one would have tried to run an investor presentation like that multilingual, right? I mean, maybe, I don't know, the FIFA or like all these giant international congresses. Yes, you bring the booth and you do all this, but an investor presentation like that, no, you would not have done that. So now that this technology and these companies are around, I mean, you have the option. and it definitely gives you. It's a nice informative. It's a nice add-on to something like this, and they can talk to their investor community in China, Hong Kong, Korea, especially Koreans less fluent than Hong Kongers in English, etc. So yeah, I think it's a great example, and that's why I wanted to talk about it around how that pie grows as this tech gets better and better. So kudos to Kudo, and good to have a billionaire as an investor. Talking about billionaires, I think Andrew Brody, majority owner, or is he still majority, or at least significant minority owner of RWS, must be a billionaire too. Like so what's going on with RWS? What are they doing?
Oh, well, I was quite excited about this. I allowed myself to get somewhat excited about the announcement that RWS has partnered with a speech recognition technology company called Sedat85. And they are launching live subtitling and captioning solution for online meetings and events. So what's good, or what's interesting, I think, is that actually it transcribes live speech and audio into text and captions. Okay, that is quite, that's provided by a lot of people. However, it then also applies neural machine translation to translate the text into apparently upwards of 130 languages. So this is a partnership, like I said, with Sedat85. I guess that's how you say it. And it's based on a Language Weaver from RWS, and then Sedat's voice recognition and speech to text technology. So, I mean, again, it's in the same space that we've just been discussing, this kind of multilingual meetings. What will happen is that you'll be in a Google Hangout or Zoom or whatever platform. The captions will appear on screen in real time in the attendee's own language. So it integrates with any platform, apparently, where live discussions and events take place. So, could potentially integrate it into our own podcast video meeting platform.
What's your sense?
Like
we can, we're not disclosing too much here, but we're working on an audiovisual localization report, and we're actually digging into all of these technologies, and some of the ones from big tech are, completely dysfunctional. They don't work at all, right? Or at least they have major limitations.
Sorry, I think we got a bit of a delay, but no, I think the thing is that it tends to be twofold. So you have a lot of people saying that they are doing live subtitling and live captioning, and they are. But what you find is that it's original language only. So they might say it's multilingual, but it's still the original language only. So it doesn't really do the translation piece in a lot of cases. There are some providers out there, and, we've covered the likes of AI Media, Redbee a little bit, and Verbit as well. So they would be kind of three of the sort of main competitors really in this. Don't really know what to call it. Let's say translated live captions, because it goes beyond multilingual live captioning. It is translating those captions live and displaying them on screen. So again, that would be some of the main competitors: AI Media, Redbee, Verbit. They've, especially Verbit recently, I think had they've been doing quite well, and obviously acquired Vitac. So and then you've got the RSI providers as well, who are kind of also in this space, but they're providing the speech element rather than the text element in a live setting.
Yeah, you could argue that once you have the text figured out, the speech should be less of a problem. Text to speech,
like synthetic voices and stuff.
Yeah. So if the text is quote unquote like not perfect, but if the text is very high quality, then I guess turning the text into speech shouldn't be a big problem. So, which would of course then basically almost obsolete Kudo's business model. So I think it's just a long, hard road to getting this to work, to really, really work, right?
Yeah. It's pretty, so the ones that we've tested, and I'm not talking about those services companies, I'm talking about the ones that are available, automated captions in platforms. So we tested, I think, Skype and Google Hangouts and a couple of others. And some of the garbage, for want of a better word, that comes out when you're trying to translate into, just regular FIGS languages. Nothing, no kind of niche or low resource language. It's not coherent in any way.
No.
It does seem like there's a way to go. But it'll be interesting to see, and potentially test out this RWS CEDAT solution.
We should for that report. Yeah. Let's ask them if they can give us a demo account or something, if it's purely tech. So basically let's wrap all of the stuff we talked about into one, and that will be our final topic, which is automatic speech recognition, recognizing Swiss German dialect and then machine translating it into standard German text, and then probably some output. So what's this about? So this was, the news here was that there was a conference, kind of an academic conference, very similarly structured to those kind of EMNLP, like those academic NLP conferences called Swiss Text, and Swiss Text 2021, and one of the so-called shared tasks in that was, let me just pull this up here. Again, it was basically around competition on dialect recognition and translating of Swiss German speech to standard German text. So that was one of the tasks that was won by the Microsoft team, and they published a paper about it, and that's how we learned about it. And I saw that some of our friends over at, I think Supertext were sponsors of this conference. Not sure why I missed it. It was just a couple of weeks ago. So, well, here we are, a little late, but still talking about it. That's good. And I mean, to me personally, this is my native language, Swiss German, right? So it's basically, it's a dialect of German. It's like, depending on how far south in Germany you live, like it's intelligible. And the further north you go, the less intelligible it gets. And then once you cross probably like the, I don't know, Dortmund barrier or something, it becomes completely unintelligible to most unless you learn it a little bit. And so the tricky bit is that there's, even within the Swiss German dialect, there's like, 10 to 20 different sub dialects that differ quite strongly from each other. So if you trained a system on like Zurich dialect, it really wouldn't work on Bern dialect, which is just, maybe 100 kilometers away, or it wouldn't really work on like, some of the more Eastern Swiss dialects. So what they did is, this task was, the goal is to build a system again to translate Swiss German speech in various dialects to standard German. They provided a labeled data set of 293 hours of recordings, mostly in Bern dialect, and an unlabeled data set with 1,200 hours, mostly Zurich dialect. And then they went about and did this. So basically, the challenge here is it's super low resource because there's almost no text written in Swiss German except texting. Like you text with people in Swiss German. It kind of makes you feel closer to that person. But there's I don't think there's like large amounts of like written Swiss German because there's no rules, no real rules. You can just kind of type it as you speak it. And so, it's an interesting thing. So it does have commercial applicability, though. I mean, there's lots of media going on in Switzerland that isn't dialect. And I think, and again, because people wouldn't read Swiss German, like it takes me longer to process Swiss German than to actually read proper High German. Right. So there is an actual, quite a significant business use case because Switzerland, it's not a small economy. Right. So there's a business commercial application here where you could take Swiss German speech and then capture and basically then, subtitle or provide kind of quote unquote translated subtitles in High German. Right. Because again, people wouldn't want to read Swiss German subtitles because the mental processing would be too much. And be like, if I had to read like Bern dialect typed text, that would actually, I think I would actually struggle to read it like at all. Like it would take quite a while. Okay. For anybody who's not familiar with the intricacies of Swiss German and German dialect landscape, sorry, you had to listen through that. But it's just, to me, when I picked up on that paper, it's like, really, Microsoft is doing research into like my dialect translated into the standardized German. That was funny. And so I came across this this conference, which I think we should cover next year. And maybe it's going to be even in person, so might stop by. All right, moving on to something just a little bit more frontier than translating Swiss German into standard German is with Synthesia CEO and co-founder Victor Riparbelli. Really looking forward to that conversation. And welcome back to SlaterPod today. Today with Victor Riparbelli from Synthesia. Hi, Victor.
Hey, guys. Great to be here.
Hey, nice to have you on.
Hey, Victor, so great to have you on. Thanks so much. We've been speaking about Synthesia quite a bit in previous podcasts, so I'm really excited to have you on and kind of hear it firsthand, what it's all about. So, Victor, where does this podcast find you today? What city, what country?
Right now, I'm in Copenhagen. So, as you might be able to tell from my accent, if you're an expert, and you guys are experts in languages, right? Then I'm actually Danish, originated from here. We now have an office here. I'm usually based in London, but I'm spending a little bit of summertime with our Danish team and with my friends and parents and family and all that jazz. Nice.
Yeah, Copenhagen, obviously one of the top cities in the world. Just before the podcast, I was telling you how much I love it. Great city. So first, why don't you try to give the kind of elevator pitch of Synthesia? Because it's a little hard for me to explain it to people. How do you explain to your friends, business contacts, like in a nutshell, what do you do?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So at Synthesia, we are operating and developing the world's first and largest platform for AI video generation, which essentially means that you can take text assets and you can turn them into video. Our vision really is to make the world's information visual. So if you think of like all of the world's information today, right, 99.999% of it is only really stored as texts. It lives inside of textbooks, articles, newspapers, whatever you have it. Most of what we know as the kind of human species is recorded in text, right? That's not because most people prefer to consume the information as text. That's because for many, many years, it's been the only really kind of scalable way that we've had to communicate with each other, right? Typing on a keyboard is easy, it's fast, and you can share it with anyone immediately. But what we're seeing is that video, audio, and interactivity really is taking over, right? Especially young consumers don't want static and text-driven interactions. No one is really longing for kind of more textbooks and more traditional New York Times. People want podcasts, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, etc. And something we discovered is that this is also very much true in the enterprise, right? So people who work in companies like us, we're also consumers at home. And at home, most of us default to using video. So Zoom with our parents or friends, YouTube for learning stuff, or Udemy or Netflix, whatever, right? We're really moving to this video first world. And I think the example that I usually kind of put out is you take something like TikTok, which is the world's largest and fastest growing social network, is almost purely video, right? If you look at the interface, it is only video. And it's a clear progression from Twitter, which was text, Facebook, which was text and images, Instagram was images, and now TikTok is purely text. So that's all great for consumers, but it's not so great for companies and for businesses, because producing video content at scale is really, really difficult. It's a physical process. You need cameras, studios, film crews, post-production, and demand has really just outpaced the speed of production. So we built a platform that uses artificial intelligence to make video production really fast, affordable, and accessible. So it really is as easy as like creating a slide deck, and all you kind of need is a laptop and internet connection. The way it works is that you log into our platform, you select an AI avatar. This could be one of our kind of stock actors that are built into the platform, or it can be yourself with a 3 to 4 minute recording. And then you just type in your script. We support 50 different languages. You click enter and your video will be ready in a couple of minutes. So this is really how it works. It is very, very simple. And if you go on our website, you can get the visual explanation of it. It's always a little bit hard to explain it like just by talking. But why this is really valuable is because the world is moving to video, right? So our customers really use Synthesia to enhance their existing content. One of the learnings we've had is that we're not really a replacement for video production. We are a replacement for text, right? So this is not about replacing all the kind of video shoots you would otherwise do as a company. It's about taking all the material you have as text and turning that into video. So that is the kind of the very simple pitch from a technical perspective. We're a deep tech company, mostly PhDs and professors, solving some really, really difficult problems and taking what you could kind of think of as Hollywood visual effects and democratizing it at scale and making it available for anyone, anywhere for a starting price of $30 a month, right? And one of the exciting things to maybe just end on that is that once we've kind of taken video production and abstracted it as way purely as software and as code, we can't only do the things we already are doing today much faster and cheaper. We can also do a lot of new things that weren't possible before. So for example, things like personalization. Instead of making one video that you show to all of your customers or employees, you can make a customized video for every single one of your employees or your customers by taking in various data points and serving it to them, right? Just like you can get personalized emails from your bank. We don't all get the same email because there's different data about us and we have different, bank accounts and things like that. So it's a new medium that's going to be defined, I think, by a new generation of creators. For us, the eventual goal is you can make a Hollywood film on a laptop. We're pretty far from that still, but in 10, 15 years, I definitely think that that's going to be possible. So I think it sounds maybe a little bit crazy to a lot of people saying you can make a Hollywood film on a laptop, and it may be. But really what's happening here is that media production is moving from cameras and microphones to something that we can do with computers, right? And that has happened to a lot of other types of media before. I have a hobby as a music producer, and you can open up your laptop and you can generate or create an entire chart-topping hit without the need for anything else than just your keyboard. That's because we can synthesize digitally pianos and guitars and amplifiers and effects to a very high fidelity, right? Same thing with images. Open up Photoshop and you can create more or less anything you can imagine. And with text, we take this for granted today, but there was actually a time where you had to sit down with a piece of pen and paper and write something. Now you can just type it on a keyboard, and that obviously enabled, an entirely new information ecosystem with the internet and social media and so on. So I really see this as actually just a natural progression of media technology, even though it might sound crazy today. But I think that really is where we're going.
I think what really kind of stood out for me when I first came across it, right? You only have so much bandwidth to look at new stuff. But when I saw it, I immediately saw the B2B value. I know that's probably, your vision is broader than that, but to me, that was the immediate, oh, okay, this could be cool even for us and our customers, right? Yeah. Now, before we go there and talk a bit more about the product, just tell us a bit more about your personal background. How did you even get into this? How did you get started with this idea? There's so many components that you're combining here.
I think the short story is this all started in my childhood. I'm a massive sci-fi fan. I've always loved computers as a kid. And in my late teen years, I kind of figured out that my interest in computers and software could be turned into a career. So I started building, local web shops for local businesses here in Denmark, so on, sort of slowly moved into a kind of more startup type of companies in Copenhagen. And after I'd been doing that for 6 years or so, I went to Stanford to the last semester of my bachelor's degree. And this was obviously Silicon Valley, right? And I was going there and it was going to be big and people were going to be thinking, much more ambitious than they were in Denmark and things like that. And that was to a large degree fulfilled. I met a lot of interesting people. And when I kind of got back from there, I just realized that I loved building things and products, which is what I've been doing before. But I wasn't so passionate about building accounting programs and more kind of traditional business software. I needed to make this kind of sci-fi interest my actual career. So I moved to London because Copenhagen isn't really the place to build a deep tech company. Met one of the professors who's behind one of the original kind of deepfake research papers. And when I saw that piece of technology, I just instantly saw that this is a glimpse into the future of content creation. There's obviously also kind of a lot of talk about the negatives of this type of technology, which we might also get in on later. But what I saw, this is a step change in how we do media. And I decided to pursue that idea, and we got a really strong founding team together of half academics and half business and product people to go on this mission of make it easier to create video content for everyone. And that is almost 5 years ago now.
And maybe can you tell us a bit more about who the co-founders are and what the current leadership team structure is?
Yeah, sure. So the co-founders of the company is myself, obviously. It is Professor Matthias Niesner, who used to be at Stanford. He's now at TUM in Munich. And he's done most of the seminal research in this space over the last 10 years or so. essentially using deep learning methods to generate various media content, both digital humans, which is what we focus on, but also general environments and things like that. So he's a world leader in this space. Same thing with Professor Lourdes Agapito. She's based in London at UCL and has also been one of the pioneers in combining computer vision with deep learning. And then the last founder is Stefan Gerald, who is the kind of business finance guy of the equation. And I think noteworthy mention, even if he technically isn't considered a co-founder, is our CTO, John Stark, who joined very early before we had raised any funding. And John comes from a very interesting background of actual building what you could think of as like the Photoshop for visual effects artists. So everything that you're seeing in Hollywood films, most of it has been developed or created on technology that he created. So we kind of combined the academic world with high-end visual effects from Hollywood and some more kind of traditional SaaS and startup building.
Got it. So let's talk a bit more about the underlying technology. I know you probably can't disclose too much here, right? But like what's built, what's bought, what is, I don't know, customized? Just tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah. So basically our tech stack is more or less proprietary. We're a deep tech company. And I think today something like 45% of our staff is PhDs and professors solving really kind of blue sky research problems. I can't go into too much detail, but we're investing heavily in driving research in the field. And I'd say we're ahead in even the academic space in a lot of what we do. But essentially to make, one thing is that you can kind of show a cool demo in the academic world, right? When you write a research paper. For this, you really only need it to work like once out of 1,000 times. You can show to the world that it is now technically possible. To actually create a product is a lot of work, right? And especially a product that can scale. Today, we're creating in the thousands and thousands of videos for our clients every single day. And that requires a lot of proprietary technology, which is not just about making the video, the images, but also how do you reduce costs to a point where it's actually something you can sell and make a profit on. How quickly can you do it, right? If it takes an hour to make a video, it's not going to be a great user experience. So there's lots of other things that kind of pop up once you start creating a product. So basically most of our stack is built to support this particular technology, which obviously is very, very new, right?
Very, very, very new, right? Is it super compute intensive? So like your AWS bill would be extremely high, or like what are some of the challenges there?
It is pretty high. Amazon definitely, I'm sure are very happy with us as customers, but that is actually one of the big challenges, right? Is that to really scale this, you need to have a version of it running, which is not super, super compute intensive. And we actually gotten to that point now, right? So we can, as I mentioned earlier on, the starting plan at Synthesia is $30 a month, which allows you to generate 10 minutes of video. And so we've gotten it down to a point where it's pretty manageable and it's only going down from here. But it is in general a very compute intensive process. Something that's worth mentioning here is that there's two types of compute intensive processes when you're doing the kind of technology we are doing. There's one which is generating an avatar, right? So Florian, if we were to take a video of you and create you as an AI avatar, you would send us 10, 15 minutes of video content. We would take that, ingest it, and train the model. This process is quite expensive. But once we've trained the model and we need to generate new videos with you, then it's, I wouldn't say then it's affordable in kind of this scale that we needed to be able to make a product.
Got it. So let's talk about, you said you can create an avatar out of me. So talk a bit about like the, I don't know who or what are multilingual avatars, basically taking humans versus taking, I don't know, code, whatever you call it, like artificial avatars. Just tell me a bit more about the concept of avatars, natural versus artificial.
Yeah, sure. Well, so I think from a high level perspective, I think there's very little doubt that we're all going to have various digital representations of ourselves in 5 to 10 years time. Like what we have today, for example, is you have a LinkedIn profile, right, which is static and it's text, and you have an email address, and you have all these things. I think we're going to move into a world where video is going to be the dominant medium for more or less everything that we do. And we're not all going to want to be on camera like 24/7. So we're going to have these kind of avatars of ourselves that we can use to create content with, just like we use an email address or a social media profile to communicate with our friends. The basic concept there is you have two types of avatars. You have one which is of a real person, right? So this could be you or me or Esther. And the way this works is that you film yourself. We have a process you can follow. It's pretty easy. You don't need any special hardware. Like technically you can do that with your iPhone. As with most other forms of deep learning, the quality of the data determines the quality of the output. So we generally suggest that if you can, go into like a green screen studio, have some nice lighting, get a good camera. You record these kind of lines to camera. The recording process in itself is like roughly 5 minutes. You send us that data, and then our machines look at all the data, they analyze it, and then they basically learn to simulate new videos of you saying whatever you type in, right? So that's the kind of core component of our technology. Then there's another concept, which is synthetic humans and synthetic voices, which is characters that are not based on a real person, but are generated. I usually explain this as like, when you play computer games, you, in a lot of games, get a screen where you can say like what kind of hairstyle, what kind of eye color, what sort of facial shape, like all these kind of parameters. And that's something that we're working towards for still images, which you can also use on our platform. There's already quite good technology out there. You might have seen something called This Person Does Not Exist. I think that has been a lot in the media. And essentially, it's going to be a version of this for video as well. But actually, the way we work with our presenters on the platform now, the built-in ones, is that these are real people, and they basically earn money for every video that's generated with them. So there's a royalty fee incurring back to them. But this is kind of like being a stock photo actor, right? So you put your stock photos up on Shutterstock or Getty, and every time someone downloads them and uses them, the actor then gets paid.
Why? That's super interesting. Why would you need that? Why would you need to have real people there? Is it better than just kind of coming up with some like artificial like avatar? I mean, is there some realistic component to turning the human into an avatar that makes it more realistic? Sorry, convoluted question, but
no, it's a good question. I mean, like one thing here is just that creating like synthetic humans in video is incredibly difficult, and I'd say it's still years out from being actually solved in a way that it will work and be as good. But there's also a lot of appeal for a lot of our clients in having real people. So for example, if you're like one of the world's biggest fast food chains, you want to have your kind of character that you're using to be someone who is in all your swag with like a cap on and a branded t-shirt. We have a lot of clients also where it's someone from the leadership team whose avatar is being used to educate. So then you have some kind of relation with that person beforehand, right? And I think that's going to be continuing to be the case. I think for some use cases, for maybe especially for like very small companies that needs to create learning material, maybe they'll choose to use someone who's not like a known face. But for bigger companies, we're definitely seeing a pattern that most of them want to have a real person that you can kind of relate to.
Got it.
And then when you're thinking about the technology behind text-to-speech specifically, how have you seen that evolve over the last 10 years or 5 years or even the last few months?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think if we take the kind of 10-year timeline, really what has happened to both voices, but also the video part, is that deep learning appeared and deep learning started working. So this is the like AI machine learning part of what we do, right? And what that meant was that we went from having these generally pretty bad, very robotic sounding voices to having what I think it generally is referred to as like neural voices, which just makes it sound a lot better. It's still not perfect, but the big acceleration thing here has been that deep learning can, in a very different way that you can if you're just a software programmer, can look and listen to lots of different voices and learn how to replicate that in a more natural manner. Whereas beforehand, I'm being a little bit black and white here, right? But basically what you would do is you could record a bunch of words, and then you could kind of concatenate them together, and you would get something that sounded like a sentence, but the intonations and the inflections, everything were completely off, right? Now the systems can actually understand sentence structure and become quite good at that. I think the last 5 years, I think really what we've seen is we're starting to see what I would call voice cloning, which means we get a lot more voices. Really what this ties back to is that with deep learning technologies, the community has managed to reduce the amount of data required to create a voice by quite a lot. And this has resulted in, 5-10 years ago, if you went to Google, Amazon, something like this, they would have maybe 2 voices, right? Because it's so much work to create just one voice. I'm not 100% sure of the stats here, but I think that creating some of the first voices there was basically like one person, like Alexa person, recording like hundreds and hundreds, not thousands of hours of of content, right? Whereas now you can actually get really good results even with just 15 minutes of data. The quality goes up the more data you put in, and if you want to have something which is like really voiceover quality, you need to do more than that. But it's at a point now where we can actually scale kind of the creation of voices, right? And I'd say in the last maybe just like 6 months or something like that, what we're seeing now is very much the same as we're seeing on the video side. These technologies are maturing from being very kind of one-dimensional to now there's like lots of different things you can do with them. So we've seen emotions, for example, in TTS voices that are actually starting to sound really, really good. This means you can do things like questions, for example, really well. It means you can have a voiceover that is sad or that is happy. And of course, it's going to be reflected in the video as well. We're also seeing some companies starting to work on cross-language, which means taking your voice in English and then creating the Mandarin version of it with your voice, right? That is a very, very, very difficult endeavor. But this is kind of like what we're seeing. And then I would say the last part of it is actually relates a little bit to the kind of synthetic humans, which is like what I call humans that don't exist. We're starting to see the proliferation also of kind of entirely synthetic voices, where you're also pretty soon going to have some TTS providers where you can go in and say, I need a voice and I want the pitch to be a little bit lower. I want it to speak a little bit faster or slower. And then you can actually kind of create a voice, which again is unique for your particular brand or use case or whatever. And then the last thing maybe is style, which is very, very important. And I think that's one of the things that is still a challenge when you're working with AI generated content. The style of speaking, right, is very important. Like if you're doing a sales pitch, for example, but it sounds like an audiobook reading, that's kind of odd, right? And the other way around. And I mean, I don't think human voiceovers will ever be replaced, or human actors for that matter. Like, just want to make that clear. I really don't think so. I think it's going to live side by side. But that's also like slowly starting to progress. You can actually start to control the style a little bit more.
And you were talking there a bit about extending the product to multiple languages. What makes that so challenging? What is it that's hard about that?
I mean, it's hard because you're kind of asking a neural network to do something that's not possible in the real world, right? So if you are teaching a system how to replicate videos of me or you speaking, that's something that actually exists in the real world. Like you can go and get a video of me and go get a lot of voice clips of me, and the system can learn from that. If you're asking it to create a version of my voice that speaks Mandarin, there is no data for that, right? Like I don't speak Mandarin. And even if you were to force me to speak Mandarin by like reading out phonetic stuff, it would sound completely wrong. So it gets into a dimension of reality that actually doesn't exist. You're not just replicating reality, you're creating a new version of it, right? So that's really hard, getting the data. A lot about this is about disentangling this different signal that is in a voice, the prosody, the consonants, and I'm simplifying a lot here, right? But being able to disentangle all these different parts out is very, very, very hard. It requires lots of data and lots of high quality data. So I think from a technical perspective, it is just incredibly difficult. Then I think the last part, which might be a little bit kind of non-obvious for people who are not actively building in this space, but there's a big question around like synthetic media, kind of like how do we actually use these things when we can have all these functionalities? What is the UX for it, right? Is it something that for example, there's a company called DeepSend, which is doing amazing work in voice, and they have now generated a system that has emotions. The way it works is that it analyzes the whole text and it figures out, like, is this sentence supposed to sound happy or sad or surprised or anxious, right? That's one way of doing it. You're just basically saying, okay, the AI will also figure out when it should be sad, when it should be happy. Another way of thinking about this is that you kind of mark it, right? You highlight the parts of a sentence that you want to be happy or sad or whatever. And this is a very simple example, but how do we control all these different parameters? And the reason that is extra interesting to me is because I see what we're doing as a democratization play. I don't know if you've had a chance to try out our app. It is very, very easy to use. Like I literally test this with my mom, like who's 60, right? Can she use this? Can she make a video if I just tell her make a video on this? And that's really important because there's going to be a big market, of course, for professionals who are used to using video production, Premiere, and like whatever they spend their time in. Certainly, it's going to be a big market for that, and they're going to be using these technologies a lot. But I think the really interesting part here is expanding the market and making people create more video than they did before, and making everyone into a video creator, right? And I usually compare this with something like text. Like today, we all create or write text every single day. It's an integral part of all of our jobs, right? That wasn't really the case 30 years. And we don't call ourselves writers, right? Like none of us, I don't know exactly what you do on a day-to-day basis, but we probably wouldn't call ourselves writers, right? That's like a function that you do while you're on your job. But if you go back 30 or 40 years in time, that was not most people's job, right? You wouldn't sit and write on stuff all day. There was some people in the company who would write things and they would distribute those. And I think that's going to be the same thing with video. Like we're all going to be creating video more and more, but we're not going to call ourselves video producers. That's just going to be like a new way of communicating that is clearly superior to just writing emails, for example. And we're all going to like slowly switch to that. So building a UX that works not just for people who understands everything about video and sound signals is really important. And that is still, to a large extent at least, an open-ended question, especially as these technologies become way more advanced than they are today.
No, super interesting, because I can tell you, I mean, from just like a outside view in, I mean, you've already succeeded. I mean, it seems very easy. It's something like you're excited to try. Right. And it's not Premiere or, Final Cut Pro where like I'm in there and like, oh my God, I don't really understand how it works. So that obviously expands your market, dramatically. Right. And so let's talk a bit about the addressable market here. Right. So you're expanding the market into the B2B side. Let's talk a bit about the B2B. Like, where do you see kind of early adopters and how do you see that adoption curve scaling up?
Yeah, sure. So I'd say we're just seeing like rapid growth right now. It's been an absolutely crazy year since we released our self-service platform. What we're seeing is that what we're seeing is a big learning, I'd say, for the first 6 months having this product in the market is that, I said this before, but we're not replacing video production. And that's very, very important. We're not competing with someone saying, okay, I'm going to go out and pay $15K to do a really nice, smooth video of our CEO addressing something. That is not the market we're at, right? The technology is not nearly good enough. And I think there's always going to be, it's going to be more authentic if it's a real video, of course, right? What we are doing is we're working with big companies that usually have a global footprint and several headquarters around the world who need to train the organization and communicate with the organization across in many, many different ways, right? They all have a massive problem, which is that they know that video is way more effective than anything else, but they can't scale the production of it. So what we're going in and doing is that take an L&D program in a Fortune 1000 company, for example. Usually you would have some part of video content, right? So let's say that out of 100 courses that you need to take over the course of a year as an employee, maybe 2 or 3 of them, the most important ones, are video. The rest is going to be text or slides that you click through. Now we're going in and we're helping these companies make all of that into video content. And where this really makes sense, right, is let's say you have a big part of your workforce, which might be more kind of blue collar by nature. They might not be as literary as a white collar office worker. It's just so simple, right? If you want to train people and you want them to actually remember what you're training them, and you take someone whose first language might not be English, for example, do they want to read a 5-page PDF or slide deck? Or do they want to watch a 2-minute video in their native language? It's just a very, very simple equation, right? If you don't have the new smartphone, watching video is a lot nicer than trying to click around on a slide deck. And also you can sit people down, you can make them watch it, you can have them ask questions. There's so many things here, right? So what we're seeing right now is a lot of internal use. And I think this is very much tied to kind of how good is the quality of the technology. What we're starting to see now is that people are also using this externally for things like in the customer journey. If you have a help desk part of your page, if you have a digital product, for example, there's probably a lot of things you want to tell your clients, right? Or if you're an insurance company, you have a lot of things you want to teach and educate your clients about. And text just doesn't cut it. With this kind of technology, you can create 500 videos in the span of a couple of months and publish them to your website. And when something changes, which it does all the time, that's also part of traditional video, is not great for this because, okay, we record 500 videos and by the time they've released, half of them is out of date, right? Here you just go into the video, quickly edit it and publish it again. So that's what we're seeing now. And then we're releasing our API platform actually here in 2 days, which is going to enable anyone to make personalized content by simply connecting it to like your email marketing program or your CRM database. And all this can be done actually without writing a single line of code. It's super, super easy to use. So I would say right now, it's just very clear that we really hit something here. And I think it might be a little bit hidden from the outside, where I think a lot of these kind of synthetic media technology companies might still to some look a little bit like, it's kind of cool, it's experimental, and maybe the quality isn't really good enough. But people really forget, especially I think if you, depending on your background, of course, that like people who are consuming content care most about the experience, not so much how it was made. And what has been proven is that it is just much more effective to use AI video, AI voiceovers than text, right? But again, very important here to underline that I think this is a market expansion where we're taking essentially kind of market from text. We're not taking market from actual video.
Got it. Yeah, no, exactly. That's what I see. I mean, like for us, for example, I'd love to have a video in like some kind of customer interaction video in like 10, 15 languages, but like actually producing this would just not be feasible at all. Like in the kind of legacy traditional way, right? With something like Synthesia, it would be possible. It would be, cost efficient and possible. So yes, you're totally expanding a market that really wasn't there. Yeah. Talking about the entertainment world, like what's your interaction so far with like the dubbing studios, media localization companies? Are they knocking at your door? Are they trying to actively ignore you? Do they feel threatened? I don't know. What's the interaction there?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a fun little entrepreneur story here, right? So, to me, it feels like we've been through 10 lifetimes already in the company. From the outside, it probably looks like a little bit less. But when we set out to create this technology, initially, we knew there was going to be several kind of stages of it, right? There'd be like a stage where very, very manual to do, taking a lot of time. And then eventually we could hopefully get it to the scale that we're at today. The first iteration of the technology was the one we kind of showcased to the world with our David Beckham video, which you might have seen, where he speaks 9 different languages. And this technology, or this kind of phase of the technology, was all about video editing. What does that mean? That means you take an existing piece of video content from a film or an advertisement, something like that, and you translate it. What we're doing today is video generation, which means you're generating video entirely from scratch, right? You're not working with kind of something someone else has shot at some other point in time. So this video editing is the first thing we actually took to market and had quite a bit of success with, let's say, big advertisements, for example, where you want to, for continental Europe, just shoot one in English and then use AI to translate the 15 other ones. But the thing is that when you're working with existing video, like a film, an ad, or something like that's already been shot, the AI systems that we have today still have a hard time coping with all of it, right? So it's kind of difficult to scale. It was a quite manual process. And if you're starting to do things like Hollywood films, right, then like most of the time for the tech where it is today, it's like frontal shots of someone speaking to the camera is the best, right? And you could probably handle like a little bit of head movement. But if someone is running through a forest with blood on their face and there's trees flying across their face, it's very, very difficult for this technology to work. And also most cuts and edits in Hollywood films is very short, right? It's like an average of 5 seconds per cut in a film. So getting the training data for each, and you need to train a model more or less for each scene is quite difficult. This has changed a little bit today. But so we went into this market. We spoke to a lot of these dubbing companies and everyone is very, very interested in this. And it's definitely going to happen. There's other companies chasing this now, but we actually decided to not pursue this particular market outside of a few PR projects that we do, because it's just like, that ends up becoming a cool visual effects tool, I think, not a company that can fundamentally change how we create content. And I think the reason for this is very much, if you take the Hollywood scene, for example, is here you're really competing with video and visual effects, right? It's artists. They care a lot about their films. It's very high stakes. Everything needs to be pixel perfect. It's very difficult to sell technology in and to work with this type of client when you're trying to build a really kind of rapidly scaling technology company. So I think it's going to be adopted, but I think Hollywood, I don't think it's going to be, they already are not the ones that are adopting this technology the fastest. As with any other tech, I think it's rarely kind of the obvious industry that adopts it because they see it as a threat. I think that, when I say Hollywood films and laptops, first of all, I don't think it's going to be like Hollywood films as we know them today. It's going to be some weird kind of thing that we don't really know what is yet. And that's going to be built by 20-year-olds who are sitting at home with their friends and spending months on creating something really cool. And it's not going to look like a Hollywood film. It's going to be something completely different. The way that I usually explain this, right, is you take something like in the music world, once synthesizers were invented, they were invented also originally as kind of a way to, you don't need a drummer or a piano player or something like that, right? Just kind of play it on a keyboard. Obviously, the quality wasn't as good back then. Now it's very difficult to hear the difference between a real and a synthetic instrument. But that didn't just mean that everyone started creating rock music with synthesizers, right? It gave us new genres. Techno, for example, electronic music is something that exists because we created the synthesizer. And I think it's going to be the same thing here. It's going to be something different. It's not going to be a replacement for it. And it's not going to be the industry veterans, I think, who's going to pick this up the fastest. In terms of localization, translation industries, I would say we see them very much as partners in this. We already work with a few of the big translation companies where essentially they offer our service to their clients, because translation is a very integral piece of making multilingual content, and it's not something we have technology that can do yet, at least, and I don't think we will for a very long time. So we work with big corporate clients, right? And if you want to translate your video into 30 different languages or 20 different languages, which is something we do a lot, then first of all, nobody is going to trust an automatically translated piece of content, especially not a big company. Secondly, even if it is something that is kind of okay, it's never going to be hit the tone of voice that the brand wants. There's a big art to translating things, right, or dubbing things for that matter. So we really see them as like part of the supply chain of delivering really awesome video content at scale. Obviously, here, because we can work in text, it just makes everything easier. You just send them, a Word file or PDF, or you upload it to a platform. They translate it and send it back to us, right? So I think we fundamentally are doing different things. Like, we are focused all about content creation, providing the tools for that. And I think translation is just, it's kind of a different beast in some way.
So how is it that you approach or get connected to these translation partners? I mean, have they approached you? Have you approached them? What kind of gave you the idea of essentially partnering to provide solutions?
Yeah. Well, so I think most of them actually have come to us after they've seen some of our work. I think it's quite interesting for translation companies and language companies, right? Because really what we're doing is actually massively expanding the market for translations.
Yeah.
In a big way, right? So it's really interesting to be able to offer this type of service as well, and of course be able to work with our clients. So I think most of them actually came to us. We've also come to some of them. That there's lots of synergies, and they have a different skill set than we have, right? So it's been pretty organic, and I think just a natural match, actually.
Yeah.
I think
also a lot of our clients, right, that we work with, they already have a translation agency. So we just become part of that kind of value chain of someone they're already working with. And we're sending more work to the translation agency, which they're obviously very happy about.
I love the thought of like, hey, my translation agency, why don't you translate? We're going to use this for multilingual avatars up there. But no, I agree with what you're saying. Again, it's that market expansion thing. And I mean, most of the listeners of this podcast obviously are in that language translation space. So I'd really encourage them to look at this, because I think it's, if you can go to your head of marketing and basically walk in with a tool like yours, this is a massive additional kind of sales arrow in their quiver, and just say, hey, have you ever thought about doing something like this? It's quite cool. So yeah,
definitely.
And I mean, thinking about making all of this happen, maybe coming back more to your core, you obviously are hiring, or you mentioned the technical backgrounds of some of the founders and the team. What's been your experience of hiring, talent in machine learning? It's a super competitive space. And what roles are you currently hiring for or looking for?
Yeah. And we're always looking for amazing people, and we're growing really fast. So, and that's actually across the whole organization. Machine learning is a part of it, but also just web engineers, customer success, sales. We're expanding everywhere. So if anyone finds what we do interesting, then definitely feel free to ping us. It's very true that the market for machine learning and deep learning talent is incredibly competitive. There's a lot of kind of factors in here, right? Obviously, the technology is working, and it's working. It's developing really fast, and it's developing a lot faster than people can that the education system can spit out enough candidates that know how to use this stuff. So that's one part of it, right? And the other part is that you have a lot of big tech companies, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, all the players that we all know. They obviously care a lot about machine learning. And I'm being a little bit cheeky here, right? But they would rather have a really, really good machine learning researcher sit and play Tetris all day on their bankroll than having them work for a competitor. So it's some pretty crazy salaries that's being offered to like top tier talent. And basically they can pick and choose, right? And they can pick and choose. And if you're someone who's done a PhD and you are really interested in this field, you don't want to go into a role necessarily where you just have to sit and produce software. You want to keep exploring the frontiers of what's possible, right? And I think for that, we're a great fit because what we do is literally the bleeding edge, right? Like we are actually doing blue sky research, solving problems that no one else on Earth has solved before. And that makes it a lot easier for us to attract this type of talent. And I think it is a different world, the academic world, than the business world is. There's different ways that you kind of measure progress and how you're happy at work. And you kind of need to really build an organization that kind of can encompass all these things, right? Otherwise, you're not going to get the top tier talent. So yeah.
Well, I'd also, I suppose, thinking about top tier talent and, you know, maybe some of the salaries that accompany that, maybe we should talk a little bit about your funding rounds as well that you, well, I know you had one back in, I think 2019 that I think we covered, that was probably the first time that we were aware of Synthesia. And then more recently, just a month or so ago in 2021. So, I mean, how did you go about connecting with the investors? I think First Mark Capital was the lead and the latest one. Why did you choose to work with these investors in particular?
So, I mean, we actually raised our first round in 2017 from Mark Cuban, $1 million. And I think like raising money is probably not the thing that most founders enjoy the most, but it's obviously a very important part of building a business, right? You need to find partners, and especially when you're building technology like ours, the R&D cycles are very long and they're very expensive, right? It's kind of difficult to just like say, oh, we'll just like hack something together and see if we can sell it. So when we raised our first round back in 2017 with Mark Cuban, like I think it's pretty traditional, like founder story that we were probably close to giving up. We'd spoken to every single venture investor we could find in London and in the US. It wasn't working. No one understood what we tried to do. There's the whole deepfake thing. People just couldn't see how this could become like a $1 billion company, right? Which is what investors are looking for. And me and Stefan we'd sold all of our Bitcoins. We kept paying the PhD. We were still trying to hustle. And then eventually Stefan, my co-founder, he found Mark Cuban's email in a Sony got hacked and all the emails were leaked. And he found that, sent an email to Mark Cuban, and Mark Cuban replied back within 5 minutes. I didn't believe him, of course. I just had published a new website. Mark Cuban was the first one that signed up with his Gmail account. And I was like, stop taking the piss. But then it was actually him. We emailed with him for 14 hours and basically got $1 million after that. And then we were off to a start. And then, as you mentioned, we did our second round in 2019 and mostly recently here with First Mark. I would say that the most important thing, right, is get the kind of investors that are right for your startup. And for us, that is someone who likes big visionary things and bold bets, right? I think ours, especially back a couple of years ago, was like, this could either become really, really big or it become nothing. If you do something that's a little bit more, dare I say, vanilla, like an accounting system or something like that, it's easier to understand. You can anchor it to a lot of other companies that you know. It doesn't require a lot of creativity to see how it can kind of work. It's a lot easier for most investors to say, okay, here in my Excel spreadsheet, I know what the total market size is for accounting programs. I know roughly what the other accounting programs are doing right and how this could potentially build something even better. But with something like this, right, you're basically coming saying, hey, cameras are going to be replaced by code in 10, 15 years. I don't have much to show for it yet, but you should believe me because I have a big vision and I have some initial technology I can show you here. The difference between raising the first round and the one we just did now is like now we've proved that we're a business and not just a business, a very, very high growth and profitable business as well. And that obviously makes it easier. Matt Turk from First Mark, who we worked with in this round, actually I've known him for a couple of years. And he was always super intrigued. But his company invests in like later stage companies. So when it came to this round, we sort of got talking again. And yeah, I think really it's a lot about like, can you work together for 5 or 10 years? Like, do you like the person? Do you believe in the same things? And yeah, I think that's probably the most important part when you're like picking your investors, right? Is that you're aligned. If you get an investor who wants you to sell after 2 or 3 years, or wants you to build something different that you're building, then that could be fine in the initial process where it's like, okay, if that's fine, let's just get going and we'll do it. But that is going to, compound negatively over the years because you're going to have a different vision of what's going on.
So other than Mark Cuban, it looks like it was tough to convince like investors in the early phases, right? To actually even understand what you're trying to build, to even like make them understand what your vision of it is. Whether they subscribe to the vision is another thing, right? But even getting it, what is this like now? You touched a bit on it earlier in what you just said, but like I just wanted to understand, like if you talk to 100 VCs that are kind of in the somewhat SaaS, somewhat maybe ML AI space, like do 90% of them understand the components you're putting together here, and they're basically, it's just a question of like, okay, is this going to be an actual business in 5 years from now, or is it still like, oh, okay, you guys are using these 7 frontier components and you're putting them together, and I don't really understand 5 of these frontier components. Like, how educated are these VCs at this point in time in 2021?
I think it's better than it was in 2019 and better than it was in 2017, but it's still very far to go. And I think it relates a lot to what I just said before, right? I think there's fundamentally 2 ways of starting a company, building a startup. There's one, which is you find a problem that's out there in the world, you build a solution for it, and you kind of go off there, right? That's how most SaaS companies are built to some degree, right? It's kind of, you find a problem, you build a solution, and you can usually prototype something that kind of at least demonstrates that it works quite fast. Then there's the other way of starting a company, which is saying, I know something that no one else does, and I have this vision of how I think the world should change, and we're going to do that. This is a lot of a harder sell because there's a lot less data. There's a lot more kind of, I guess, betting on the person and the team that's behind it. And when you're doing something like what we're doing, it was a very abstract idea back then. Probably still is to some extent. And it is by nature is a niche area, right? It's very difficult to understand how hard is what we're building, right? Like that took years to say. Now I can say, like, look, we've been doing this for a long time. You look at some of our competitors who've been doing this for 2 years, and their quality is still half of what ours are. It is really hard, right? Don't fall for the media headlines of like, oh, this tech is everywhere. You can just download something open source. And like, yes, you can, but there's a lot more that goes into it. And this understanding is just like not intuitive. And that's not so weird because it's a very small market still, right? The market cap of synthetic media is probably still less than, it's like $200 or $300 million maybe, or something like that. So I don't think it's that strange. And then I think maybe the last part of it is there's an element of like what we do now is more obvious. But back when I started in DC, a lot of the people with the skill set that is on our team, like we're building self-driving car companies, for example. Self-driving car companies is a good idea that looks like a good idea. Like if you can make a self-driving car that actually works, there is clearly a massive market, right? You don't have to convince anyone of that. You have to convince them you're the right person to build that idea and that you're going to be the one who captures that market. But the fundamental idea is sound, right? There's no one who's gonna challenge you that much on that. I think what we had here was a good idea that looked like a bad idea. If you take our pitch from back then, it was just kind of like, yeah, but like, how is this ever going to scale? Right now, it takes you 1 PhD, like 2 days to create 1 video. How people going to feel about watching synthetic videos? Is this really ever going to work? Is it going to be regulation? It's like, I don't really understand or believe this. And I think a lot of that is also because VCs are not content producers, right? If you haven't actually spent a lot of time making video content, you don't know how complicated and time intensive it is, even to make very, very, very simple corporate content of someone speaking to the camera, right? It is so involved, or voiceovers or whatever that you're doing. So I think that was a kind of a combination of those things. But I also think that bet is those are the ones that can pay off really well, and I think it has for us. Because now it's a lot more obvious and now it's a lot more interesting, and it's very clear that there's a lot of traction and growth in the market.
Hey, you briefly mentioned regulation, so why don't we just briefly touch on deep fake? I don't even know what question to ask actually, but like, where's this going? Like, what are some of the kind of guidelines or not or lack thereof? Like, where do you see this going? Yeah,
so deep fakes is, well, I think that word has taken on so many meanings now, right? But I think to most people, when you say the word deepfake, you're thinking of something negative, right? You're thinking of the negative use of AI-generated content. So the media narrative has for the last many years basically been, there's this new technology. It's going to be very bad. We're going to have fake news everywhere. You can make speeches of politicians saying things they don't say, non-consensual pornography, all these things. And they are certainly true, right? And this technology is definitely going to be used by criminals or people with bad intents, just like they use smartphones and cars and telephones and every other technology that's out there. I think what's kind of been missed in that is that it's kind of been equated to this like one negative use case. And the reality is that, right, 99.9999% of the use of this technology is for very vanilla business use cases that are not particularly salacious, maybe, but create a lot of value, right? But so with this deepfake question, right, it's really important, of course, that we do everything we can to reduce harmful use. And I think it's great that this new generation of tech companies is actually thinking in ethics from the beginning. That was a pillar of our company from day one. And there's sort of two questions to unpack here. Like, one is, how do we ensure that our technology at Synthesia is not used for bad? That one is relatively easy. We have an on-rails experience. We don't provide access to the underlying technology and things like that, right? And we verify everyone that gets on the platform. And we have a strict rule to never synthesize content to anyone who has not given consent. That sounds obvious, but there's a lot of companies, right, who'll do like an Obama or Trump, not to like spread misinformation, but as a kind of a PSA. The second, I think, and more important question is, in the information ecosystem, how do we make sure that the use of these technologies are generally reduced outside of what we do? And there's a few things to do there. Technology-wise, people are creating deepfake detectors, for example. We can use this AI to detect if a video has been manipulated or not. I don't really believe that these are going to work, but they might, be a part of like this broader solution. And I also think that the problem with these is that even now, but even like 5 years time, most content you consume online is going to be synthetic in some way or form. Like even today, TikTok and Instagram filters are also AI generated, right? So whether we kind of set the boundary, if I could give you a program today that could detect if an image was photoshopped, that'd be great, right? But 99.9% of the images on the internet is photoshopped. So it becomes kind of a signal that is just part of the story. More interesting part is media provenance, which is creating a chain of accountability for like, where does this piece of video or image, sound, or whatever come from? This doesn't just solve the deepfakes, but it's a general tool to ensure we can know where content comes from. So we work with Adobe on this, with the Content Authenticity Initiative. The way I usually explain this is like, you want to have like a Shazam for video. So Shazam is an app that you might know on your phone. You can listen to a song with it and it'll tell you what song it is. You want to have a similar kind of system for video that can say, okay, this video you're watching now was originally uploaded by the BBC 6 months ago. And what you're watching now is 97% the same, but something is a little bit off here. Click here to watch the original video. This YouTube already does with music. If I make a video of myself dancing to Michael Jackson in my living room, YouTube will detect that. And they know that there's some copyright holders who will want some money for them to play that on their site, right? So they'll put an ad in it, give some money to the rights holders, take some money themselves. They'll put in the description that this video contains a soundtrack by Michael Jackson, owned by these right holders. This system kind of already exists for music. We need to do this for video as well. And the last part is education. So we've been able to forge and do bad things with images and text for the last, I don't know how many years. This is now also going to be possible for audio and video to some extent. And we need to make sure that people know that, right? So one part of education is obviously that you educate people like you do the traditional way. I spend a lot of my time doing that. But the other way I think is actually the most important one is the exposure, right? The more synthetic content that you consume, the more you know that is now reality. And I think it'll be very natural. You take something like, we just did a campaign with Lionel Messi, for example. We can create a personalized message for yourself and a friend. 4 million people have now used this. They obviously know that's not a real video of Lionel Messi, right? Same thing with some of these apps you can create that have the billions and billions of videos created. And that is just going to give ourselves or everyone a sense of like, this is now possible. So don't believe everything you see in a video. That was a very long answer, but,
no, it's
a very important question.
Yeah, it's an important question. I think we could talk about it for hours. But yeah, maybe just one question to close on. Tell us a bit more about what we can expect from Synthesia in the next 2 to 3 years. What's your product vision in particular?
Yeah, sure. Well, so the next couple of years here is all about making, on the one side, all of our AI and machine learning algorithms better. That with the avatars you're using, you can add emotion, you can add gestures, you can add several people on the screen, like all this type of things. That's probably the product roadmap you would expect, right? Other part of it is simply our web platform. which is essentially a video editor that lives in the cloud. And you can do a lot of things with that. We're building this for synthetic media, which means that things like personalization of videos is ingrained into the platform. And really, what we want to have is, in a couple of years, not Adobe Premiere, but a simpler version of Adobe Premiere that sits in the cloud. It's made for everyone to use, and it's made for creating personalized content and videos that's generated on the fly. So that's kind of where we're going now with the product. And for the next couple of years, it's definitely going to be like business communications that we're focusing mostly on. So obviously video content, video chatbots is going to be a massive thing. There's really cool stuff coming out soon. And then in a couple of years' time, we'll maybe start looking more kind of entertainment side of things and creating what I think of as more kind of storytelling rather than informative content, if you will.
Mm. So one last one. So now that you're outlining this, it sounds very deliberate, and it sounds like you really have kind of a clear path in front of you. Like, how do you manage all those competing ideas? I mean, when you're working in such a frontier field, you must have like 2 ideas a day that you think are awesome, right? So how do you keep the company focused on like something that sounded good now, but I mean, without, not just getting dragged into all kinds of directions?
No, it's a great point. And if you ask me in a week, some of this might have changed, right? No, I think that in general, you need to have a long-term plan of where you want to go, because even if it's not something that you think about every day, that kind of determines all the kind of micro decisions that you make in all your teams, right? So having the vision right is extremely important. But that said, like, when we're thinking about like what features do people want in our creation app, for example, that is of course something that is driven. I'd say there's 2 types of these PM decisions, product management decisions. One is like what people clearly want, right? But what are people asking for? And there's a lot of features that people are asking for because we're still an early platform. A lot of them are not very exciting, right? People want a way to download their videos or publish it to YouTube or like whatever you can think of. Not super exciting, but makes your workflow a lot easier. Then there's the second part of it, and that actually comes a little bit back to the kind of UX question we were talking about earlier, which is all the things that people can't imagine because they don't know what the tech can do, and they can't imagine what it could potentially do, right? And that is very natural. I sit and think about this stuff 24/7, and I've been doing so for 5 years. So our mental model at Synthesia is very different, right? So it's kind of like balancing those 2 things. But I think that the high level plan of like, what are we going to be doing in 3, 5, or 10 years feels relatively set. It actually has been from the beginning of the company. We knew that there was a couple of hurdles and milestones we needed to get to. And we're actually following that plan like, pretty much. Like, of course, there's been left and right turns, and sometimes you have to go back a little bit and go forward again. But
no major pivot. So, I see you're executing quite beautifully on that. Hey, Victor, that was super, super interesting. Thank you so much for this. And again, I encourage our listeners to head over to the website and really check it out. I think this is one of the coolest arrow you can have in your sales quiver, and servicing your clients is a great idea. So thanks so much for taking the time today.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Enjoyed it.